quorum, can I just remind everyone to switch off their mobile phone as it may interfere with the recording system, and also remind you to declare any relevant financial and other interests as we move through today's business, and also with regards to your tablet, if you could make sure that it's switched off, the sound is off, which is function and F8. Apologies have been received from Mr. Bradley. At this stage, are there any members of any other apologies who wish to register? No? Okay. Thank you very much. Moving then to the draft minutes of our meeting of the 1st of May. You find those at page 5. Can we just seek agreement that members are content that they accurately reflect the business of that day? Okay, thank you very much. We have a very brief session which I think Jonathan's going to speak to us around, and it's top tips for how to use and maximise your device. So some members may have already had this very quick session in other committees, but I'll pass over to Jonathan.
Thank you, Chair. Central Committee Office has given us instructions that all committee members have to receive this top tips briefing, so I'll keep this particularly brief because you've probably received it. Coffee now. Yeah, I'll come with you. You've probably received it from other committee meetings anyway, so I just wanted to run through the very, very basics. It's really to do with the updates. Your device needs to be switched on a regular basis to receive the updates. If a member arrives at a committee meeting 5 minutes before the meeting starts and switches it on, it will slow it down. So it's recommended, the Central Committee Office recommended you would switch it on a regular basis, at least once a week. You could use it for Googling at home or whatever it may be. As long as it's switched on, the updates will come through. It's also recommended that you would do it over a recess period as well. Some people would probably throw it away into the corner for, I'm not looking at anybody in particular, but for a week or two. But it's recommended again, if you switch it on, the automatic updates will come through. And we can't really emphasise that enough. Apparently it's what's slowing down people's machines. And I know, David, you had a couple of other issues, but that was the main concern other committees were saying. The other issue that they wanted to highlight was to navigate around PACs and calling up PACs. And the easiest way to do that would be actually from the Adobe icon on the start page. If you go through that.
This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly.
Our committee inquiry into inclusion in the arts of working class communities. We have a briefing now from National Museums Northern Ireland. I'll just refer you to the Clerk's memo, including terms of reference, which are at page 10, a list of organisations which have provided written submissions at page 14, and also NMNI's written briefing paper, which is at page 16. Also, just remind you that this will be hand-sorted. And can I welcome the following officials to the meeting? We have Paddy Gilmore, who is Director of Learning and Partnership, Jude Hilliger, who is the Director of People and Performance, and Pamela Baird, who is Head of Strategy. You're all very welcome.
Morning. Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming this morning. And can I ask you just to make your statement, and members will then follow up with some questions.
Yes, thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.
So first of all, just to say thanks very much for inviting us along. It's a pleasure to be able to give you some evidence in terms of the work National Museums stuff. I suppose fundamentally we believe that everybody in our society has a right to engage with and benefit from our museums. We therefore welcome the committee's interest in including more people from working class communities with the arts. We ourselves have a strong commitment and a track record of delivering community partnerships, broadening audiences and developing social inclusion initiatives. National Museums have consistently sought to secure funding to develop such initiatives. Mostly it has to be sought from external sources. And to give you some examples, Coming to Our Senses was a programme we ran for the visually impaired with the Blind Centre. Live and Learn, I think we've already mentioned in our submission, is a programme for socially isolated and vulnerable older people. Treasure House, again, for older people, is a partnership with Clanmill Housing. And we've just recently secured some funding for a community engagement initiative, which is about developing staff competencies in community engagement and working in local areas. And I think it's probably fair to say we've also consistently reflected government objectives, policy imperatives and departmental priorities through our annual business plans and through the social inclusion programme, which we've just concluded at the end of March. Across the museum sector, generally speaking, I think it's fair to say there's a strong desire to effect social change and tackle issues of inequality, poverty and social exclusion. The Museums Association sets out this policy framework for museums, and it's called Museums Change Lives. And they say that museums change lives in a number of ways. They enrich the lives of individuals, contribute to strong and resilient communities, and help create a fair and just society. Museums, in turn, are immensely enriched by the skills and creativity of their publics. And you'll see in our submission there, we follow that on with some examples where museums enhance well-being, they create better places, and museums inspire people and ideals. So in many ways, museums are ideally placed to deliver programmes which engage working-class communities. In terms of visitation museums, I'm glad to say that we've seen their reach grow since 2009. As far back as 1991, 30% of people surveyed had visited a museum in the last 12 months. By 2009, that figure had risen to 32%. During 2010, 11 and 12, the figure rose to 41, 44, and latterly in 2012 to 48%. So that's the number of people who have consistently sort of visited museums during that particular year. The NISRA Continuous Household Survey last year gave us some additional facts, and some of these are quite interesting. They say that 78% of those people living in the most deprived areas have actually visited a museum in Northern Ireland in their lifetime. Now that means obviously 22% haven't, which is a bit of concern for us, but 78% is a reasonable figure. 42% of those living in the most deprived areas had visited a museum or science centre in the previous years. And from our perspective, 33% of those living in the most deprived areas had visited a national museum in the previous year. And this is a bit of an increase from 32% in 11-12. Now obviously, those people who don't visit, there may be some barriers. And the Continuous Household Survey looked at things like, and the reasons given where people weren't interested, it never occurred to them, it was difficult to find the time, there was a lack of transport, there was no need to go. So there are barriers there in terms of visiting museums which are well known, some of which are about perception, i.e. it's maybe not for someone like me. some of which are to do with awareness, which could be unaware of the facilities or maybe no experience of visiting the museum, and the reality of things like the cost of getting there and transport and so on. I think one of the things that's probably missing from the continuous household survey is the sort of the income issue, and certainly poverty may come into it. And if we look at the impact of the welfare reforms, Belfast, Derry and Strabane are in the top 4 districts most impacted in the UK. So poverty must be an issue because lack of disposable income has got to be an issue for people. So in terms of the barriers, I mean, we look back to some work we did during the closure of the Ulster Museum, and a company called PLB Consulting had done some work for the Heritage Lottery Fund. And the barriers they anticipated were things like cost, that was just mentioned, lack of awareness, specific facilities, limited intellectual access, maybe the management ethos of the place, poor physical access to and from the venue and in the venue, and user perceptions about relevance and welcome and so on. And national museums have responded to those sort of research findings. So, in many ways, we have a list of things which we think mitigate those barriers. We provide free entry at the Ulster Museum. We have funded programmes which target people from areas of multiple deprivation. A number of our marketing initiatives will also do the same and raise awareness about things like free entry. During the closure of the Ulster Museum, we had a cultural change initiative, and basically at that point in time, before closure, 22% of the audience at the Ulster Museum came from the C2DE community. After that cultural change initiative, which was really about 3 years of outreach and working in local communities and engaging with people and telling them that the Ulster Museum, for instance, is free, 44% of the community came. So a change is possible, and you can attract people from these areas. And we also sort of work to create a sense of ownership through the engagement initiatives. So it's not enough to simply say that sort of we want to develop audiences. We want to actually become a society. Yeah, we want to actually tackle social exclusion. And my directorate is the Director of Learning and Partnership, and within the title there was a clue, like, we're very much interested in community partnerships, which are hugely important. In terms of the audiences which are underrepresented, traditionally, and again this consultancy report would say there are about 12 different audience groups, ranging from people lacking basic skills right through to preschool kids. What we have found is sort of the underrepresented communities in terms of our audiences tend to be the over 65s, people from C2D communities, families with children, teenagers and young adults, and visitors with disabilities. And that's not to say those people don't visit, but they are underrepresented in our audience groups. And therefore, again, we've put a series of mitigations in place, programmes like Live and Learn, which we've mentioned in our submission, and Treasure House. And we've just secured in the region of about £1.7 million of funding to actually sort of like put in place programmes which attract older people engaging with museums. The Social Inclusion Programme, which we just have finished, was an initiative which was happily funded by DECAL to the tune of £306,000, and we got money, I think, on the 1st of July, and we had to have it spent by the 31st of March, which was very, very welcome, and I'm going to tell you in a wee bit more detail about that. We're also aware of the fact that sort of that people engage in different ways in museums and learn in different ways. So our discovery areas within the Ulster Museum have been hugely popular because they allow people with different learning styles and different abilities to engage with museum content. In terms of disability, I'm happy to say that sort of the access is now at something like 97–98% at the Ulster Museum. So the Ulster Museum is totally accessible. And in terms of sort of like of engaging teenagers and people from non-traditional backgrounds, we mentioned in our submission, New Lodge Arts, a programme about the First World War, done with a group of kids from the New Lodge who wouldn't be traditionally visitors to the Ulster Museum, who wouldn't traditionally sort of like engage with that history, which has been hugely successful, which has shown them the benefits of working with the museum, the impact of the First World War in their local community, and it ends up with the sort of like an exhibition which is now part of a programme in the National Portrait Gallery. That's hugely successful and absolutely sort of like very affirming for those kids. One of the things we're really interested in is learning, because learning in many ways is a route into museums. A 1999 study found that one of the main criteria influencing visitation was a person's attitude to learning. So social class and work status tend to correlate with education levels. Then there's an issue about the emerging profile. So one of our interventions is to address those learning barriers. So the explore, engage, enjoy ethos, which we have embedded within national museums, is very much about that. Saying learning is about the ability to come here to our museums, to enjoy the process, and to very much to learn part of that. The discovery areas I've already mentioned. are there for people with different learning styles and abilities. And effectively what we have developed is a much, much broader learning programme that provides a learning offering for everybody, an interpretation programme which suits the needs of everybody. If I could just mention the social inclusion programme funded by DCAL. It was great to get this money on the 1st of July, and it was a challenge, I have to say, to spend it within the year. Happily I can confirm we did. But we broke that into 3 major programme areas: volunteering and employability, partnership and lifelong learning, and formal learning programmes. And we had 18 different initiatives, all of which sought to tackle poverty and inequality and improve people's lives chances, break the cycle of deprivation. We had 14,000 participants, all of whom were from areas of multiple deprivation, and we worked with different organisations to ensure that happened. We had strategic partnerships with Belfast Education and Library Board, who target underperforming schools. We worked with the Northern Ireland Housing Executive Social Inclusion Unit. We worked with organisations like Barnardo's and Sure Start. We work with the Northern Ireland Community for Refugees and Asylum Seekers, the Workers' Education Association. All of those people work on the ground with communities that we want to reach. Some of the programmes we provided are directly ourselves, some of them with community organisations. And there were things like parental engagement, early intervention, all of those things that make a difference to people's life chances, on all of which were based in our local museums. And in terms of our reach, I did say that we wanted to target the people in 25% of the most deprived areas. We actually were able to target probably the top 10%, even the top 5%. And when we looked at it, we've actually worked in 8 of the 10 most deprived super output areas in Northern Ireland. So that was the social inclusion programme. My only concern about it was the short-term nature of it, and it would be nice really to have it run again. And just for reference with the committee, some of this work is already happening in Wales, and Baroness Kay Andrews has produced a programme for the Welsh Government, a series of recommendations. I think there are 33 recommendations. And she is saying that, that there are common drivers which enable change, some of which will probably ring true with the committee. And she cites things like a greater strategic capacity at the top to optimise knowledge and resources, a clearer policy direction to drive purpose on the ground, integration of funding streams to maximise opportunities, a common platform for knowledge to make it easier for teachers, communities and families to know what is actually out there in terms of the arts and how to access it, easier and more appropriate access to opportunities with more understanding of benefits and impacts. And there's a real thing about how we measure benefits and impacts. Common training initiatives to exchange professional skills and connectivity on the ground, i.e. partnerships which are led locally, connect with the key cultural learning and community people. So in terms of our recommendations, and I suppose we asked ourselves the question, is it possible to provide more opportunities and improve working class inclusion in the arts? I think yes is our answer to that. Strategically, I think we require an interdepartmental approach to coordinate resources and ensure value for money. On the delivery side, is there a possibility the government could look at the Delivering Social Change framework as an effective tool, an effective vehicle for delivering defined funding streams to target initiatives and organisations? There's always the issue, the perennial issue, I'm afraid, of transport, but I don't think it's beyond our wit to be able to sort that out and coordinate transport provision to facilitate access to all of our cultural venues. Community partnerships we think are really important. I think they should be funded because they are the way of actually reaching people on the ground. And I think there's 2 other things we just add. Dedicated resources, I think, are required for this. First of all, specific skills are required to undertake social inclusion programmes. The work is often resource intensive. It provides limited financial return. So the money needs to be there to make sure that it's done in the proper way. We also need to make sure that that it's additional to the current levels of investment, because we have to maintain our existing audiences. And the money that provides the flexibility is the money that provides the creativity and allows us to respond in ways which are more creative, I suppose. And finally, that investment's got to be consistent. It's got to be long-term sustainable, and with long-term sustainable interventions, you can build social capital and tackle social exclusion and effectively affect meaningful change. So, thank you, Chair. That's our opening submission.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you very much for the detailed paper which you provided as well to accompany your presentation. You have your figures there for 13-14, with saying that you have been able to engage with an excess of 14,000 people from areas of multiple deprivation,
yes,
with cultural experiences and opportunities. Outside the NISRA figures, how do you collate information on backgrounds from people who visit all of your sites?
Can I pass Pamela?
We conduct annual exit surveys, which are conducted throughout the year representing the audiences and our visitor number patterns across all sites. And the questions we would ask there would around profile would be about if there's children in the household. It would be there would be questions around income. So then it's conducted by an independent research company, and that would provide us with C2DE figures, which give us an indicator of deprivation. I mean, it's only one of the 7 factors contributing. So that would be the main way that we would measure audiences, and then questionnaires through the actual social inclusion programme, where there would have been a lot of evaluation done there, which would have captured some additional information.
Okay. And with the majority of those who have visited from that particular background, have visited the Ulster Museum or the other sites?
All 3 sites, in fact. What we were keen to do is we were keen to make sure that everybody had an opportunity. One of our programmes was a 2-site based programme. So they could have a trip to the Ulster American Folk Park, they could have had a trip to the Folk and Transport Museum, and then there was a trip to the Ulster Museum. And one of the other things we did, we had quite a nice thing, which was a weekends at the museum initiative where people were able to stay overnight as part, something which probably is beyond the means of most ordinary people. It's expensive in many ways. So it was spread across. But the other thing we're keen to do is we're keen to make sure that people got the programmes we normally have. We weren't putting on special programmes in many ways. People were looked after in slightly different ways because we're aware of the fact that they may not be traditional users. But they got the ordinary programmes we have, like Magical Time, or the programme to do with Egyptology, or the transport programme, or Discovery Farm, or whatever. Mm-hmm. So we weren't differentiating in that way. We were simply, I suppose, enhancing access.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you did mention in your presentation there that you spent money on marketing and initiatives really promoting the Ulster Museum because the entry is free, but yes. Obviously that's not the case in the other sites, which is clearly a challenge.
Yes. It is. I mean, there's that barrier to participation. So one of the things we were able to do, for instance, with the decal money during the year, is we were able to provide free entry. And this year, in fact, as part of our business plan, we have how many?
2,500 free family tickets, and they're being targeted at schools in the super output areas. Yeah,
and beyond that, then we will also provide another 20 schools with free entry. So we can. There's things we can do to actually to mitigate the cost effects. One of the things we can't really cope with without additional funding is actually transport. Although having said that, it seems to me that there is a lot of transport in this country, and certainly within Belfast education. In fact, all the educational library boards, we have a lot of yellow buses, which maybe work at 9 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So there may be something we could do in between times to make better use of those things. So we tend to target our resources in areas. In fact, even when we have no money, if we're offering free entry, we will use the NISRA index to look at the schools, for instance, or the community organisations. And quite often we find small pots of money. So last summer we brought something in the region of 48 community groups and summer schemes to the Ulster American Folk Park and to the Folk and Transport Museum from a slightly different pot of money we had, and we provided free transport and free entry, and obviously free programming.
And you mentioned obviously the partnership engagements that you have with community organisations, yes, such as Bernardo's and Sure Start. Are those for a set period of time, or are those type of engagements going to be able to continue on?
Yeah, well, I mean, those partnerships will continue on. So, for instance, the Workers' Educational Association, they work with people in inner city communities, they work with people in rural areas, a lot of places that we can't actually reach with their dedicated outreach staff. So that's been an ongoing relationship. The Sure Start relationship's been an ongoing. Bernardo's we started last year, but we will continue. So, it's always nice to have a bit of additional resource because you can be creative in terms of your programming. But certainly those partnerships can continue with or without resource. And that's what we will do.
There's always a concern that sometimes there are initiatives and they're great while they're on. You've got the money there, yeah, but once that stops, then that community then is left, yeah, and there's no further engagement.
Yeah, and that's a problem. Short-term money in itself is absolutely fine, but I suppose it's akin to exercise, really, isn't it? In terms of cultural engagement, short bursts of exercise are absolutely fine, but really what's going to make the difference is sustained, and it's a bit like that with cultural provision, sustained ongoing engagement with a cultural institution will sort of like will build relationships and sort of will build the benefits. So there is a danger with the short-termism, but that's why I think the community partnerships are really important. Those are people on the ground who are actually there, are aware of what's happening in local communities, have a foothold in local communities, and really can respond to their needs. Quite often, if an institution arrives with a small pot of money to do something, parachuting in might be the sort of maybe the nicest way of sort of describing it, like, you know, but that can actually probably do more harm than good. So it's much better to have a long-term, sustained relationship which delivers sort of longer-term benefits.
I think, Chair, just to add to that, one of the things that we were very fortunate last year to have this additional money. But all of our programmes are scalable, and we have submitted bids into the department because the Minister is very keen on the programme that we're running. So you know, we can do a lot with £300,000, but we can equally, you know, £30,000 can make a difference. So I think that you know, we're very keen to ensure that the programmes are sustained in some form.
But there are also challenges for the museum in relation to its own funding and the type of exhibitions that you can put on. And surely it's about, you know, if you have an interesting exhibition and you have something which can have a draw that will bring people from across all areas and backgrounds regardless.
Yeah.
Surely that in itself is also a challenge for you.
Well, it is. You know, for example, in 2012 we had the very successful Age of the Dinosaur exhibition, which brought in 135,000 visitors, and that was our record year. But it's a very expensive exhibition to put on. But it did broaden the audiences. It brought in a whole new family audience, and we can't do that every year. But we have to ensure that that a lot of the work that we do is mainstreamed into the general programming. But with lower programming funding, it does become a greater challenge to fulfil all of the objectives that we have.
Can I just ask before we move on to the other members about your collections engagement strategy and how that works?
This is a new strategy that we're in the process of developing, and the board is very keen to ensure that it's not just visiting the museums where you get access to the collections. It's about ensuring that the public is able to engage with the national collections, because effectively they belong to the public. So this is about ensuring that there is outreach as well as visitation to the collections. We've got a number of different programmes that we're seeking to try and deliver, one of which is to take artworks out to schools on the extended schools list. So we're hoping to work with Achieving Belfast and Achieving Derry to bring artworks out to schools, probably to the GCSE and A-level art classes, and then do some work in our collections, in our main collection store, where we can bring small groups of art students into the store to see how paintings are restored and conserved for exhibition. So you know, there are a range of things that we want to do, such as collections online, and increase the number of images that are online to the public, and make that information meaningful rather than just a photograph of an object.
Okay.
Chair, it's also important to say that, as Jude has mentioned, one of the things we would like to do is sort of like, you know, add benefit to what's actually happening in schools. So while we'd certainly want to concentrate on areas of deprivation, one of the things we'd also be keen to do would actually engage kids with art. We had a project as part of our social inclusion programme with Corpus Christi College, which is really about sort of like, you know, giving those kids exposure to the work we do within the museum, give them a wee bit of intense sort of like, you know, I suppose, educational support and so on, and I end up with a small exhibition actually in the school. But it's very important, so we actually work with strategic partners. So Achieving Belfast, Achieving Derry will already have identified the schools who are in need of support, and if we can actually add our resources, then we're actually sort of like, you know, creating a lot more leverage, because we're working with kids who will really, really benefit from the programme.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Humphrey?
Thanks, Chair. Thank you very much for your presentation, which I have to say is very impressive, and I commend your organisation for the partnership approach that it's taken, which I think is absolutely common sense. In working with so many organisations that you've identified and establishing so many programmes which clearly are reaching out And 78% is a very good figure, to be fair. And you know, I think monies that are coming from regional government, from DCAL, you know, are clearly being well spent. With the, not being critical, and that's not the intention of this question, but there's obviously 22% that you're not being able to reach, and that's, you know, not for the want of trying.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if there's an opportunity with the new super councils coming along, because they have bigger budgets. And, you know, some of the smaller councils, I mean, I served for a time in Belfast City Council, which took tourism seriously. Some of the smaller councils haven't had the funds or the wherewithal to really be as actively involved in tourism. And I know this is not tourism, but is there a way in which you can work with the super councils, given their new extended and enhanced budgets, that might allow you to hit some of the 22% that you haven't hitherto?
Yeah,
I say
so.
that's not a criticism. I'm just
No, that's absolutely fine. I mean, I think sort of that 22%. I mean, let's bear in mind that sort of that some people may have no real interest in coming to museums. Like, let's be honest about that. But I mean, to start at a very basic level, you know, a lot of the work we do would actually sort of be sending people out to local communities to break down those sort of barriers, to tell them, look, this is what you can expect when you come to the museum. A lot of people haven't been over this last number of years because they've forgotten about it, or it hasn't occurred to them, or maybe they're there with their kids. So that's part of that sort of rationale as well. Like, you know, but certainly in terms of the super councils, I would have thought that yes, an increased focus on culture, an increased focus on tourism, and so on, would provide us with opportunities, and certainly we will be pursuing those. I think as well as that, there with the super councils, there's going to be a very strong focus on their areas of deprivation, and they will have a clear agenda in terms of the communities you want to serve and the communities you want to reach, and we'll be more than happy to do that. I think, again, the partnership aspect comes into that, because basically, again, they're the people on the ground, they're the people with the knowledge. And quite often, I think it's very important that the resources that we spend are spent wisely. And if they're spent strategically like that, through a partnership like that, I think you can start to see those results, you know.
Mm-hmm. Could I just say as well, in conclusion, reaching out to schools is very important. And I know certainly when I was at primary school, we would have gone on trips to the culture, I suppose Ulster Museum as it was then, to see the mummy, and then down to Folk Museum and so on. And I know you have many more museums now within your estate. But could you also suggest that perhaps, you know, reaching out into youth organisations and youth clubs in some of those areas might be, and I declare an interest as a member of the Scout Association, but you know, I think sometimes kids in that environment, as opposed to the school environment, they will go along and participate, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I did mention earlier in summer we had some money from the Heritage Lottery Fund, and I think it was in the region of £40,000. We brought in, I think, 30 youth and community schemes into the Folk and Transport Museum and 18 into the Ulster American Folk Park. This summer, as part of our business plan, we will actually be bringing in 30 of those groups, similar sort of groups. And again, our criteria would be they would have to be based in areas of deprivation. Yeah. And again, it's about trying to build a relationship with those, because you're absolutely right. Quite often the informal learning opportunities are sometimes even better than sort of the opportunities in school. So yeah, that's very much part of our programme, and we will continue that because it's been hugely successful. And from our perspective, you know, our sites are big. During the summer, the open air sites can absorb groups like that, and we can actually provide them with a really, really interesting and informative programme. So the feedback we've gotten that's been really good, and it's an area, yes, we're continuing to develop.
Thanks very much for your answers, and very well done. Congratulations to everybody involved.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms McCavitt?
Thank you, Chairman. Thanks very much for your presentation. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I know some of the points I was going to raise have already been raised, but transport affordability.
Yes.
How's that problem been tackled? I know, like, you know, if you're elderly, you would have made a free bus pass and you're able to go, but there's a lot of people out there, you know, that would like to go and visit a museum that couldn't afford maybe the entry fee and the bus fare. How are you tackling that?
I suppose I have to say with difficulty, that's where the discretionary money comes into play. Our Live and Learn programme, for instance, is funded by Big Lottery, and we've just received word that we've an extra 200,000 over 6 years of funding as opposed to 5 years of funding. On the strength of that, we also received £500,000 for a programme called Treasure House with Clanmill. So there's £1.7 million to spend in that area. So it's quite easy in many ways for us to provide transport for all those community groups and all those older people's groups we work with. So in some senses, that's that's available to us. In terms of sort of tackling it generally, within our budget this year, we wouldn't be able to provide free transport. We can certainly provide free entry, we can provide free programming, so on. We definitely wouldn't be able to provide free transport because the transport bill can mount up quite significantly. So it's when we have discretionary money, like the social inclusion programme, we're able to provide it. So what we would do, for instance, with a group or school or organisation, we would go out, we would work with them in their local area, give them a degree of outreach, provide transport to and from the local area. I think the cost thing is interesting. It really is interesting, and it's definitely a barrier. But one of the other things we've found about transport is that people actually feel reassured when they're coming from their local, should it only be 2 miles down the road, from their local community to one of our museums, if transport is there for them. Because a lot of people don't travel out of their local communities that much. And there is this apprehension, and we've found this, so it's very important that transport is provided there as well. But the transport issue is a perennial one. It's quite expensive, but having said that, there does seem to be a lot of transport in this country in many ways, Sorry, would you like to say, Jude?
Okay, just another, the social inclusion programme money, you mentioned in your presentation that you had difficult spending the money within a year.
Yes.
Was there any money handed back?
No.
Okay, that's good. And also the 2,500 free family tickets that will be offered, how would you go to advertise, say like myself there, that it's a family of 5 that live in Newry?
Right, okay. Well, it really depends how affluent you are, I suppose, but without, it wasn't sound flippant. What we're trying to target those as well. So one of the first ways of using those tickets, the Polish community, we've worked with the Polish community over this last number of years, and the Polish community, in many ways, are under a bit of stress at the minute. So they have a Saturday school, and they have 400 kids go to that Saturday school. And at the end of May, I think it is, we will provide a free session for them at the Folk and Transport Museum. They will come along with their parents and so on, and as part of that, then what we will do, we will target specific families within, not the entire group, but specific families within, with these free tickets. Where we're working on an initiative, say for instance the thing that Jude mentioned, where we're working, say, on the art in the local communities and the local schools and so on, we will then sort of use some of those tickets for those particular families. We'll work with Belfast Education and Library Board and Achieving Belfast to target some of their schools. So we hope to use those tickets strategically, so it wouldn't be a case of sort of just advertising. We have 2,500 free tickets, because it's not first come, first served. We're trying to make those tickets as accessible as possible to people who would be non-traditional visitors. But beyond that, we're also trying to make those tickets work for them. So if you get a free trip, for want of a better explanation, to the Folk and Transport Museum, the Folk Park at the Ulster Museum, it's about saying, well, look, actually, if you've enjoyed this experience, there's another opportunity to come back. There's a ticket for you. So that's how we intend to use those.
Okay. Just, I know that in presentations that have been given to us in the past, job losses were mentioned because of budget restraints, and I was just wondering with the programmes and the 5 new strategies, will there be new jobs created within that? Or was there new jobs even created to...
Well, as a consequence of the budget pressures, obviously right across the board, we're not the only ones affected. We've lost in the region of 100 full-time equivalents over the course of the last 6 or 7 years, and we've had to absorb a lot of additional work within the existing staffing complement. Pay awards go up, the pay bill goes up. The rent and the rates and the utility bills go up, and that leaves less money for programming. And so we are trying to do as much as we can with the resources that we have, and we've any flexibility within the workforce is targeted towards the key priorities, and we have, I think, undergone significant change in the last number of years to try and ensure that we're focusing on the programme for government, we're focusing on promoting equality, tackling poverty and social exclusion, because that is the only show in town. But we've also got to sustain our visitor numbers, because we rely heavily on around £1 million worth of self-generated income, and that's an important part of our funding mix.
Sure, just to say, in terms of the social inclusion programme last year, there were around 14,000 people involved in it. All of that was delivered by the existing staff. And no additional staff were brought in for that.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Mr. O'Hosheen?
Thanks, Chair. Much of my stuff has been covered there, but I'll just say there are a couple of things there that are quite I suppose, exciting and the Farsi and the outreach and the outreach programme, that idea of the night museum thing, I think is a very catchy thing. Just in terms of the transportation issues, and coming from a rural constituency and quite a distance from any of the three museums that we're talking about, and wearing my DRD hat now, you're right when you talk about padding. There is a lot of transport here. The unfortunate thing is none of it's integrated, and very little. There is a pilot programme in Gannon Cookstown, but it's going nowhere fast, I think, maybe, in fairness, like, you know. But I just wondered, have you tied in or done any work in terms of that we have an inquiry within DRD on this issue, but have you tied in anything there with the likes of the education boards, with community transport, or indeed with TransLink? You know, there is a lot of failure there, but there's a lot of success there when you look at things like the Giro and the World Police and Fire Games and the City of Culture and all the rest of it. You know, transport did work for those for the most part. So I'm just wondering, have you tied in at all with that?
Well, I'll maybe answer just and you pick up a couple of points. Yeah, I mean, we're looking for transport provision, say, for instance, within our sites, which is important. So within the Folk and Transport Museum, we have probably quite a good package deal with TransLink. On special event days, we've had trains running in from Botanic and so on. Like, you know, so there is a relationship there, and you know, I think there's a fairly good value for money relationship there. Certainly in terms of, sort of, say, the Titanic programme, the Folk and Transport Museum side, we ran shuttle buses and so on. Like, you know, so we have done that. I think the difficulty with sort of education and library boards and so on is sort of like, as far as I can see, they don't really see that as their role to provide transport into museums. What we have done over this last sort of couple of years is we have, for a lot of our free programmes and where we've provided free transport, negotiated regional deals ourselves. So the actual cost of transport has come down, and we've been able to sort of, like, you know, to facilitate, you know, probably the farthest flung rural areas, if that's a correct term. But we have a transport basically sort of for any area of the province. But there is a cost to it, you know. So we haven't actually cracked the nut, but I mean, I don't think we're on our own in that one, because when I look at the sort of the report that's been done for the Welsh Government, they're saying it's an issue there, and I think it's an issue all over. I'm not honestly sure what the answer to it. Certainly the answer is not throwing money at it. You know, there has to be more coordination and probably a more of a strategic view. I think one of the recommendations coming out of the Welsh report is that they actually set up a committee, which is cross-departmental, to look at the transport issue to see can the problem be solved. I don't think we've solved it as the answer, you know, but we've certainly been able to sort of, like, probably have some economies of scale and some efficiencies. Yeah.
I think probably a more general point around integration and collaboration amongst government departments is something that, you know, transport could be quite an easy one to tackle. You know, we can't build Rome in a day, but you know, I think one of the parts of the social inclusion programme that we haven't really touched on is the Museums to Work programme, which is part of our overall employability programme, because we recognise as quite a large employer right across the whole area, and we have a responsibility to try and develop skills and employability and around people, particularly the long-term unemployed. And we had a programme as part of the social inclusion programme last year where we brought 5 people who had been long-term unemployed from areas of high deprivation. And they're just coming to the end of their 6-month employability programme, where they're gaining World Host qualifications, they're getting interview and CV and skills, and hoping to then go out back into the world of work. And we have a second programme starting this year, but just for fewer people because of the cost of running the scheme. But the opportunities for collaborating with Dell, for example, I think are just absolutely ripe, and we need to try and ensure that some of these ideas are being cross-fertilised amongst some of the other departments. So I think that's a challenge for us all.
I think there is a general agreement that there is a silo mentality within transport provision right across the board. And in fairness, some of the far-flung, as you talk about, Paddy, are probably best served by the community transport sector. Yes. So I think there is an opportunity and an option there to go into that do serve quite a percentage of the population here. Greater Belfast area. So, thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Mr. McMullen.
Yes, and thank you for the presentation. On 2.1, you talk about the cultural barriers. Does the content reflect or acknowledge the interest and life experience that people are trying to attract? How would you plan to go out and look at that? Are we talking about going into areas there, like deprivation areas, to see what exactly is their cultural interest? And how best then you could portray that within your museums? I'm talking about the past conflict here now. When are we going to portray that as part of the cultural heritage?
Well, as you know, within Ulster Museum we already have the Troubles Gallery, and I suppose in many ways it's a starting point for the work we would like to do there. At this point in time within Ulster Museum we have Art of the Troubles, and Art of the Troubles has proved to be, it's probably not the right word, but certainly very well visited. And what it does, in many ways, it looks at the Troubles from a lot of different perspectives, and certainly through the eyes of the artists. And there are, I suppose, statements made through art which probably are quite broad, and so on. I think probably when we're talking cultural here, we're talking about sort of like, looking at people's tastes and the things that really work in museums, quite frankly, and the things that people really want to go to museums for are mummies, dinosaurs, and things of that nature. So the dinosaur exhibition for us was what you might call quite a populist exhibition. It provided, I think 136,000 people through the doors. A very strong sort of programme to support that exhibition as well, which was hugely popular and brings in a wide swathe of people. So when we talk about sort of cultural provision and talk about it sort of like our programming, we need to make sure that sort of that programming reflects the sort of the wishes of all people, and that's in the sort of the fairly populist sense. But we've got sort of the decade of centenaries and the whole thing of the First World War coming up. At this point in time, the Ulster Museum is spending in the region of £600,000 on a new exhibition, which will engage with probably the modern history from 1600 onwards, but specifically the decade of centenaries, and specifically with the anniversary of the First World War. So that's the way I suppose we reflect the sort of the different sort of cultural provision and so on.
We're also hoping to do some research later on in this financial year to try and establish some deeper understanding of what our non-traditional users would want from our museums.
How are you going to go about that? You did reflect, Paddy, on that there, that it's down to numbers. What actually attracts the numbers in, which is different than from what the people want to see in those cultural areas we talk about here. So there's a conflict there between getting the numbers in that you need and also appealing to these areas that you want to, the cultural barriers.
Yeah, well, there's always that balance, really, isn't there, between sort of the programming and sort of the populist programming and sort of the.
There's both and really, because when you attract large numbers to the museums, which in the last number of years we've been successful in doing, we are attracting a fairly broad representation of our community. And the Ulster Museum, before it closed in 2006, attracted between 200 and 250,000 visitors a year, around 23% of which were from the lower socio-economic demographic. When we reopened in 2009, that has consistently reached around 5,600,000 visitors a year, and probably between 35 and 40% from the lower socio-economic demographics. And that is, the project was all about opening up the museum, not just physically, but emotionally, to ensure that everybody felt that museum represented what it wants. What they want to see, but equally we then have to get out into the communities to find out, well, what is it that you understand about museums, what would you like to see in museums, and as Paddy said, a lot of what they want to see the dinosaurs, they want to see the mummies, they want to see the laveries, because that's what people connect with. So there's a twin track approach, but if you reduce the overall visitation levels, that has a disproportionate impact on the hard-to-reach audiences.
I've noticed there you haven't, through the chair, that you haven't mentioned the number of out-of-the-area visitors. We're talking about the numbers coming through the doors locally.
Yes.
Now, how many of them are visitors? Do we know what the visitor wants to see? Now, I know we do. You're putting exhibitions on about the wars and that there, 1940s, 1914s, 18s, which is all fine, very, very, very good. When will we move forward and talk about an exhibit our modern history? It's quite a lot of people are very interested in seeing. Is there a reluctance not to do that yet? Are we too diverse to do that?
I don't think there's a reluctance. I mean, a lot of it would be funding driven. Like, you know, I mean, last year, I think we had a Peace 3 bid in for the redevelopment of the Dulce Museum's Troubles Gallery. And that was in partnership with the BBC and WAVE, the victims' organisation. And to my mind, it was a really good bid. That actually wasn't funded, but you know, there was very much a strong belief that if the money became available, we would be redeveloping the Troubles Gallery further, and that's something we would intend to do. In terms of the current exhibition in the Ulster Museum, it really runs up until really about the 1940s, at sort of the end of the Second World War, and then there's a space, and there's a wee bit of industrial Belfast, and then you're into Troubles. What we're looking at is we're talking about sort of like a more phased ending, so we'll actually probably that gallery will expand in terms of the storyline up until the sort of like late 60s, and then that area where it's industrial will then reflect that period of the 60s, which was a period of obviously of great change and turbulence. It'll probably be done through graphics and so on, and then we move into the Troubles. So there's a much clearer link between what happened in the 20s, 30s, 40s, right through the 60s, then in the Troubles era. So it's not a case of not being willing to engage with it. It's something we would definitely will engage with, and it probably will be the next iteration of the galleries. Again, it's funding dependent, you know. So if the funding's there, we will willingly engage.
Just, I would like to see us maybe going into the communities and looking how both communities here reflect their own history and cultures right through to the modern day, and maybe that's something that you could take back into your museums, because if we are stopping at the end of the 40s, we're now 70 odd years ahead. Yeah. And really if we can't put in there and keep in pace with all the museums, for example, in the south of Ireland are doing, and getting big numbers of the visitors in there. They have to be doing something right. I think it's maybe it's time we did look at that there, and I would look forward to that being some programme that you maybe could embark on. Yeah. And I wish you well with that there, but I'll be very, very curious to see when we will move from the 40s into the 60s and 70s.
Well, that will happen by November. This gallery will be reopening in November, and you'll have that transition. But in terms of the Troubles Gallery, I mean, it's yet to be done.
I look forward to that one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hillage.
Thanks, Chair, and congratulations on your figures as well, because anybody can walk in here and say you're hitting 78% there'll not be too many doing that, so well done. Paddy, you did mention there about the decade of anniversaries, and that was where I was going to ask the question. Up until last year I was chair of the Mid-Antrim Museums, and certainly the engagement there with folk who probably hadn't involved themselves before, that seemed to be a driver to get people involved. Yeah. Do you find that as well? Or?
Yeah, well, we're very much doing that. I mean, we've started into this. I mean, I suppose our decade of centenary started with Titanic and the 1912 anniversary. So we had, I suppose, maybe with a fair bit of practice in engaging with a whole range of different communities. I suppose one of our things is about trying to create ownership of these things and trying to create a much broader perspective. So we have been looking at securing funding from the Heritage Lottery Fund for this. But apart from money for the gallery, we've also secured, I think it's about 65,000 for programming over a 5-year period, which allows us to actually engage with local communities and local people and organisations over that period of 5 years. So the programming around the First World War really started with two things: the New Lodge initiative, which you have in your papers there, and also some work we did with the PSNI with young people at risk, and we worked with the PSNI and the Ulster History Foundation to look at artefacts from the First World War. And these are kids who are at risk and can go potentially one way or the other. So the PSNI intervention is to really to help them to go the correct road. And we've facilitated that, and we've used our curatorial staff and our handling collections and so on to engage those kids. I think with the First World War, one of the difficulties is that it's probably more of probably more of a connection, sort of like, just a sort of like a time connection with the Second World War. The First World War, it's slightly beyond living memory. So we're very, very keen to engage, and so our programme will include work with community organisations. It will include the development of videos. It will include drama, poetry. In fact, just last week, I was in France and Belgium looking at sort of some of the sites, so we get a real idea of sort of like the significance of these sites, the scale of them, the importance of them. And we get a real idea how this actually ties into the local communities. One of the other things we've done then at the Folk and Transport Museum, we ran a series of, I suppose you would call mini, I'm trying to think of it, mini sort of dramas on the First World War and the whole there, and these are for secondary school kids, introducing kids to the whole concept of the war and the various outworkings of it, the various factions, and the politics of it, so that people really get an idea around it. So yes, very exciting programme, and a real opportunity to bring in people who wouldn't traditionally engage with it and wouldn't really have a huge awareness of it, and to create a much more sense of the significance of it and the impact it had in this community, and the impact probably it continues to have in this community in many ways.
And further to add, Chair, then on the initiatives, the employment initiative, there's some 66 places within your measurables there.
Yes.
Is that can you do more than that, or is that, are you sort of maxed out at those figures?
Well, I'll let June answer that. No, we're not really. In terms of the volunteers, we do more of that in terms of volunteering. So we have a volunteering programme which has been hugely successful, and we can take more volunteers.
And is there any indication of what sort of background those folk?
Well, with the volunteers tend to be sort of more widespread, like, but certainly with the Museums to Work initiative, certainly we can take more. I think we've come across the problem of double funding, and that sort of that. I think Stephen Farry had sent a letter out to all government departments, the LBs, last year to say, can you take more? And we said, yes, hardly we can do that. I think we came across this double funding issues.
Some sort of your programmes like the youth employment schemes and things.
Yes,
like
yeah,
that,
absolutely.
That,
yeah, we're very keen. We were very keen, certainly in terms of youth unemployment, to address that issue. And one of the issues I'm particularly interested in addressing. The logistics didn't work out, is basically what I could say.
This is a difficulty that we found, that because we're funded by DCAL, we can't attract funding from other government departments, or we find it hard to attract European funding because we're not responsible for employment in the narrow sense of the word. But our own Museums to Work programme is, it costs us £5,000 to run, to give somebody a placement for 6 months, which is a relatively small amount of money in the grand scheme of things. And the social inclusion programme last year allowed us to bring through 5 people. But we provide places for apprentices, but then that requires us to have a master, in this case blacksmith. But we need a master joiner to be able to train other apprentices. So we're keen to do far more in employability, because we do feel that we have an important role to play, particularly in developing traditional skills and crafts that are in danger of being lost to us.
Okay, thank you. Ms McCorley?
My point's been made already, so it's okay, I don't need to, but I'd just like to thank you for the presentation. Well done.
Thank you. About any other members, any questions? Can I just ask how your approach to inclusion compares with organisations similar to yourself in other jurisdictions?
Yeah, well, I suppose one of the things we reflect basically sort of, first of all, the Northern Ireland Museums policy, which is, I suppose, one of the main intentions there is about giving every child a cultural experience, so very much, obviously, feature in that. But in terms of the Museums Association agenda is a UK-wide agenda. And I think sort of like the whole idea of social inclusion and actually doing something proactive to tackle poverty is a very, very big agenda. Very, very strong in Wales at this point in time, an agenda pursued also by National Museums Liverpool, and an agenda which is becoming sort of like, I suppose, more pertinent as you see the sort of I suppose the report, the Royal Commission on Social Mobility, which has shown there's a much bigger gap in the fact that sort of that now there are more people who are in poverty who are working than not working. That gap's becoming wider. And therefore, I think museums are becoming more conscious of the fact that sort of that we have a role to play in tackling social mobility and tackling poverty and sort of addressing the issues. I think the general feeling is that we can't tackle poverty. It's not our job to tackle poverty, but we can certainly make a contribution. And that's basically what we're about. And I think that's a view shared right across the museum sector in the UK and in Ireland as well. In fact,
Okay, thank you very much. Can I just apologise on behalf of the committee that we weren't able to make the visit to the Ulster American Folk Park, but we would like to be able to make arrangements with yourselves.
And we'd be
for the
delighted
autumn.
to host you, Chair.
I just thank you very much for your presentation today and for your briefing. It's very much appreciated.
Thanks very much. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you very much.
Members, we're moving on to our next briefing, which is from the Lough Neagh Cooperative Society. Just refer you to the memo at page 32, correspondence from the Deputy Minister at page 35, which was considered by ourselves on the 6th of March, and also responses from the cooperative at page 38. And we have two officials coming to the meeting. We have Patrick Close, who is the Director and Chief Executive of the Cooperative Society, and Frankie Conlon, who is a Director. Good morning, you're very welcome to committee. Can I ask you to introduce yourselves and also to make an opening statement, and members will follow up with some questions.
Certainly. Madam Chair, could I just introduce yourselves? My name is Patrick Close. I'm Chairman and Chief Executive of the Lough Neagh Fishermen's Cooperative Society in Tunbridge. I'm joined by my fellow Director, Frankie Conlon, who also is employed by the Society as a taxing officer and has a great deal of experience in the practicalities of the fishing operation. Could I begin by thanking your committee and staff for facilitating this opportunity to tell you something of the work we at Lough Neagh Fishermen's Cooperative do in connection with eel industry in Lough Neagh. In many ways, it's an opportunity for us to inform you about our industry and perhaps address the issues raised during the course of a presentation made to this committee back in November of 2013. Whilst I do not intend to take up your time in responding in detail to the many inaccuracies and misrepresentations voiced on that occasion, I do, however, need to set the record straight in the interests of a unique industry, which has an important role to play in the local rural economy and is a key player in attempts at European level to address the many issues facing the species and the industry across the continent. I believe you, the members of the KEL Committee, have been provided with copies of a comprehensive written response prepared by us for the Department back in February of this year, and which sets out the Society's approach to the issue of licences to fish for eels on the loch. At the outset, it might be useful to very briefly define some of the terms which will no doubt crop up during the course of our discussion today. Lough Neagh Fishermen's Cooperative Society is variously referred to as the Society, the Co-op, or simply Two Meal Fishery, and is responsible for all the freshwater stages of the life cycle of the European eel within the Neagh Ban system, that is to say Lough Neagh and the Lower River Ban. There is a single stock of European eel, all the one species. The terms used refer simply to various stages in their life cycle. Glass eel is the term used for juvenile eels carried into river basin districts throughout Europe, including the Neagh Ban system. They are carried here on ocean currents known as the Gulf Stream and Atlantic Drift. Those glass eels, once they have entered the Lower Ban, undergo a period of acclimatisation in transition from a saltwater to a freshwater environment. Given the right conditions in terms of water temperature and flow rates, these tiny juveniles begin to feed and gradually develop the power to swim upstream, at which stage they are known by the more familiar name, elvers. Those fish are trapped and transported directly to the loch, where they will continue to feed and grow for a number of years, during which time they are known as brown eels. And perhaps just to confuse things, at this same stage, they are known by our neighbours on the continent as yellow eels. It is these brown eels which fishermen are authorised to harvest during the fishing season. And those fish will have been in the loch for around 6 or 7 years before reaching a marketable size. So they are quite a slow maturing fish in the wild. Those fish which evade capture in this way for a number of years will eventually undergo significant physiological changes as part of the maturing process to become silver eels. This transformation takes place in male eels at about 12 to 14 years of age, and anything from 18 to 25 years of age in the case of female fish. It is these silver eels which undertake the epic journey back to the Zaragoza Sea in the Gulf of Mexico, some 3,500 miles from these shores. The area known as the Zaragoza Sea is approximately 2,000 miles long and more than 700 miles wide. Such is the duration of the various life cycle stages and the distances covered in migration, and only very recent advances towards breeding and captivity, that there are still many unanswered questions relating to eel biology and ecology. You will have seen from the written response that the cooperative has been in existence for 50 years, all but the past few months under the leadership of the late Father Kennedy. My personal involvement dates back to 1987, from which time until August of last year I held the post of Secretary and General Manager. In 2013 I was appointed Chairman and Chief Executive following the death of Father Kennedy. The structure of the cooperative and its governance are explained in detail in the written submission, which also sets out the Society's primary objective, that is to say, to increase the prosperity of fishermen by cooperative action in all kinds of fishery activity, fish marketing and distribution, and to improve and develop the fishing industry in general, and that of Lough Neagh in particular. Clearly, that is a wide-ranging objective, and one which requires the management of the Society to look at the bigger picture when it comes to deciding policies and procedures, with a raft of considerations to be taken into account. The Society markets in excess of 400 tonnes of eels each season, of which approximately 80% are delivered to customers in the Netherlands, with some being forwarded from there to outlets in Germany. The majority of these fish are processed and sold as either whole smoked eel or smoked eel fillets. The balance of the eels are shipped to Billingsgate, where most will be processed as jellied eel, a very traditional dish in the East End of London. The cooperative obviously manages the commercial fishery for the benefit of its members, but it also has an extremely important role to play in conservation, and indeed the very survival of the species. Some might regard those two activities as somewhat being at odds. To achieve success in both areas requires something of a balancing act, in that exploitation of the finite resource which Lough Neagh is, without due regard for conservation, would render the industry unsustainable. You, the members of this committee, have heard our approach to conservation described as a smokescreen by persons who have not accepted the necessity for the Society's approach, despite the affirmations of European legislators, the Minister, the Department, DEFRA and indeed the courts. I hope that during the course of our discussion today I can demonstrate just how seriously the Society does take its obligations in this regard. The Society has explained in various forums the rationale it employs in deciding the policy and procedures used in deciding on matters connected with the issue of licences. The facts are that the Society has not been in a position to increase the intensity of fishing for many years, and certainly not since the formulation and approval of the eel management plan for the NABAN system in 2010. This is confirmed in an extract from a position paper recently issued by Dr. Derek Evans of AFBI, the Agri-Food and Bioscience Institute, who is now considered one of the foremost experts in the study of eel science. When he stated, with reference to CITES, that is the Convention on International Trade of Endangered Species, that, and I quote, "Under the terms of the NABAN Eel Management Plan, Lough Neagh Fishermen's Cooperative Society are not permitted to increase their fishing effort above that recorded in 2008. However, the Eel Management Plan permits the annual capture of approximately 400 tonnes with no perceived detriment to the wider European stock. End of quotation. It might also be useful to consider the importance of the eel fishing industry, one of our few remaining truly indigenous industries, to the economy of Northern Ireland. This might go some way to explain why the Society must give such serious consideration to its policies for the management of the fishery on the loch. Loch Ney's fishing industry is worth about 3.2 million to Northern Ireland's rural economy on an annual basis. In terms of the value of the catch of Loch Ney eel, fishery has held the #1 position on several occasions in recent years for all fish landings in Northern Ireland. And here we're making the distinction between what consumers would regard as true fish as opposed to shellfish. The UK Eel Working Group, in its national report for 2013, records, and again I quote, "The Neiban system sustains the largest remaining commercial wild eel fishery in Europe, producing 16% of total EU landings and supplying 3.6% of the entire EU market, that is wild caught and aquaculture, in 2007. Since the introduction of eel management plans in 2009 and the restrictions imposed elsewhere, those percentages will have increased since then. The cooperative is in a position whereby it is obliged to regulate with caution the grant of licences for eel fishing on the loch. The loch is a finite resource and therefore requires careful management, including the control of fishing intensity. The Society operates a number of important control mechanisms through which it can regulate fishing intensity. These include, for example, a defined fishing season, placing a numerical limit on the number of licences which are issued, restriction on permissible fishing gear, and placing a daily quota on the weight of eels a boat can market. I should point out that the Society's role in the management of the loch, and in particular the issue of permission to fish, has been subject to judicial review on 4 occasions in recent years, at a cost to the cooperative of more than £150,000, hundreds of hours of staff time, as well as tens of thousands of pounds of public monies by way of legal aid to applicants, although there has never been a court finding in favour of applicants for the issue of additional licences. These reviews are a matter of public record. The Society's objective is to secure a viable future for the fishing industry in Loch Ney, and it has responsibility for making tough decisions in order to achieve that aim. The Society has control over the granting of licences for eel fishing in Loch Ney by virtue of the fact that it has legal ownership of the relevant fishing rights. It has, through its management committee, developed policies and procedures for the grant of those licences, taking account of elevated recruitment levels, long-term assessments of stock levels, and indeed marketing considerations. I have previously referred to the socio-economic importance of eel fishing to the local rural economy, an aspect which takes on added importance in times of economic downturn in other sectors. The value of our industry to the fishing community cannot be overstated when we consider the lack of alternative employment opportunities for them. If I may turn briefly to Europe, you will be aware from press reports that issues surrounding eel stocks have been exercising the minds of legislators in Brussels for a number of years now. It was therefore gratifying to welcome Dr. Bernhard Fries, the Director of the European Commission's Maritime Affairs and Fisheries Directorate, to our headquarters in Tunbridge in November last year, accompanied by Mr. Jim Nicholson, and indeed to hear Dr. Fries comment very favourably on the contribution made by the cooperative in the past, and to express the expectation that Loch Ney will have a major part to play in Europe's plans to bring about a recovery of European eel stocks in years to come. I should at this point also acknowledge the very practical support we have had from all 3 of our local MEPs, and indeed the Office of the Northern Ireland Executive in Brussels, in putting the case for Loch Ney eel fishing industry within the corridors of power when issues arise which threaten our future. And I know that they have all been very supportive in doing that. The scientific research undertaken by AFBI in conjunction with the Society has produced significant material results which will continue to contribute to decision-making processes. In 2006, a presentation was given by Dr. Derek Evans of AFBI to EU's Scientific, Tactical and Economic Committee for Fisheries at a meeting to consider what a Nile management plan should contain. That presentation was based entirely on the operation of the Lough Neagh eel fishery, details of the state legislative measures controlling it, and peer-reviewed publications which had analysed it. In essence, the Lough Neagh fishery is upheld as a blueprint for eel management plans, and indeed, many of the measures that the cooperative has voluntarily had in place for decades are now being adopted in other river basins throughout Europe. In many ways, the eel industry in Lough Neagh has been one that, for a large part of its history, little was known of it, and one in which few outside of the fishing community took any real interest. The significance of the industry in Lough Neagh is reflected in the award of Protected Geographical Indication status to Lough Neagh eel in 2011 under European law, and thus referred to simply as PGI status. That places the unique Lough Neagh eel in the company of Europe's elite brands: Champagne, Parma ham, Greek feta cheese. More recently, Armagh Bramley apples and Cumbria potatoes have acquired entry to this exclusive club. PGI status recognises the product's unique association with a defined geographical area, its quality, the skills and traditions of those involved in its production, and its rich heritage and provenance. These are all important tools in marketing nowadays. As for the future, the cooperative has already embarked on an ambitious project with InvestNI and local knowledge providers to develop product and marketing potential with a view to adding value and increasing employment. In the current financial year, we are investing somewhere in the region of £250,000 in taking forward such initiatives aimed at securing our market share. In fact, the construction of our new processing facilities are due for completion in the next few days. The Society, as fishery owner, is also actively engaging with DCAL in the development of a long-term strategy for the management of Lough Neagh, together with other stakeholders. I just want to very briefly tell you about some of the investment that the Society has undertaken. Between 1984 and 2013, the cooperative has invested almost £4.7 million in supplementary restocking to compensate for the decline in natural recruitment into the Naban system. Grant aid in the amount of £1.16 million has been received, leaving a net investment on the part of the cooperative of just over £3.5 million. A further £450,000 worth of purchases have been made in recent weeks, bringing gross expenditure on restocking to just over £5 million, at a net cost to the Society of £3.7 million. The Society regrets that it's not possible for it to accommodate all those who seek involvement in eel fishing as boat owners, but it will vigorously defend its entitlement to any financial support legitimately available to it. Incidentally, you may wish to learn that the cooperative has just a few weeks ago exclusively funded the restocking of eels into the Lagan system, with a view to supporting further scientific study in a smaller body of water. The scientists at AFBI will be able to monitor the development of those fish for the next 20 years. In a similar vein, the cooperative has recently committed to the funding of a scholarship in conjunction with Queen's University Belfast to facilitate a 4-year PhD study into the biology and ecology of the European eel. It is anticipated that the project will answer some of the questions previously not addressed anywhere in Europe and will feed into the long-term decision-making process for legislators in Brussels. And finally, may I quote some figures which reflect the changes in circumstances with which the cooperative is now faced. During the period 1965 to 1983, and 83 was a watershed for the eel industry in the sense that it heralded the decline in natural eel recruitment. So between 1965 and 1983, the average natural recruitment into the system was 11.4 million fish. Between 1984 and last year, 2013, the average was 3.2 million. If we look At the last 10 years in isolation, that is from 2004 to 2013, the average was 0.9 of a million, 900,000. That gives you some idea of the scale of the decline. To summarise that, from 1984 right up to 2013 last year, the natural recruitment amounted to just under 96 million fish. To go along with that and to compensate for that decline, we in the Society have purchased a further 105 million fish. So, in essence, the purchased fish for restocking have exceeded the number of those arriving on our shores naturally. Now, that obviously is reflected then in the catch of brown eels and silver eels. The 50-year average for brown eel catch is 485 tonne. In the last 10 years, it has averaged 315 tonne. In the case of silver eels, the 50-year average is 154 tonne. In the last 10 years, it has averaged 86 tonne. I hope, therefore, that I've demonstrated the magnitude of the challenge which lies before the cooperative in building a sustainable, viable future for succeeding generations of Lough Neagh fishermen. I think I should leave it there for now and perhaps deal with any questions you might have.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Obviously, from the evidence that we've heard and the correspondence that has been exchanged, it's quite obvious that there are huge tensions between the association and the society. Can I just ask, Pat, what the society has done maybe to try to rebuild relationships?
Madam Chair, we at the Society are obviously responsible for the welfare of a huge number of people involved in the industry. And we try our best to accommodate as many people as we think we can, given all the stuff that has gone before. We have attempted to engage with various individuals who may have had reason to have a difference of opinion with us. And we've done that at a local level on a one-to-one basis where possible. Unfortunately, those type of approaches have not always facilitated agreement. But it is something we have tried.
And since obviously we had our meeting with the association on the 21st of November,
yes.
And there were a number of things which were said, and I know that you've reflected that there were inaccuracies within that presentation as well. But since that date, have you had any discussions with representatives from the association?
No, we have not. No.
Okay. And you did mention that there were inaccuracies, and I'm assuming that's in and around the quota issue and also the number of boats which are being used.
Yes, there were certainly issues or inaccuracies there. On that occasion, you would have also been referred to extracts from letters issued by myself on behalf of the Society. I would have to say that in at least some of those cases, those extracts were quoted out of context and bore no relation to the argument that was made at the time. I would go even further to say that some of the comments made essentially amounted to an attack on the integrity of officers of the co-op, which I regard as unjust.
Okay. In your paper, you've said that it has been suggested that there is a relatively small number of people who are looking for licences, and that this could be resolved quite easily were those to be issued. However, what you have said is that that this may not be the case, that they may not be eligible and may not meet the criteria, as there are others who are working as boat helpers and so on who may. Can you maybe elaborate on that?
Yes, of course I can. The fundamental principle of the issue of licences in Lough Neagh relies on agreed criteria. These criteria are agreed by the Management Committee, which is representative of fishermen right around the lough. So the criteria are set there. and have remained largely unchanged for a number of years, it has to be said. If we go back, perhaps maybe at this stage, as much as 20, 25 years, we could have easily each year had applications for up to 40 new boat owners' licences. That's no longer the case. I think this year it was 12. So the figure has dropped. But the point that you raise in relation to qualifying under the criteria for the issue of those licences, and the fact that there are other people out there who would also consider themselves as qualifying, is based on the satisfaction of the criteria that are set. And essentially those criteria dictate the amount of experience, the number of years that have held a helper's licence, which is a secondary position in the boat, if you can imagine it as that. So those criteria do spell out the requirements in that regard. And the point I've made, and the point which you have raised, is that not only the people who are making the application for the new licences, who obviously regard themselves as eligible, but there are a number of other people, and a much larger number of people, actively fishing on the lake at this point in time as helpers, who would also satisfy those criteria. So it's not enough to say that this problem could be resolved by the issue of 6 licences. That's not the point. The point is that if there were additional licences up for grabs, there are more than 6 people who would feel they're justified in making an application for those.
Okay, and just to clarify for me, what level of increase in Elvers would allow for then a further increase of licences? So at what level does the stock have to be in order for you able to move away from this 2008 number?
Well, I think that's a very astute observation and a very pertinent question at the minute, because in 2014, throughout the European system, there has been an increase in Elver recruitment. This was first seen back as far as last November, when the glass eels started to arrive on the shores of Spain, Portugal and France. And those have all been reported, although not officially yet, but I am aware that there have been very significant increases there. That was borne through into the UK and the Bristol Channel in particular. And we were in a position where we could take advantage of that by buying an additional fish this year, spending roughly the same amount of money as we have done in the last 3 or 4 years, but in effect getting about twice the number of fish for our money. So that again is a reflection of the increase in elder recruitment. The hope is, and it can only be a hope at this stage, that we in our turn in the NABAN system will see the effects of that as well. Our season for elder recruitment essentially begins in April, depending on water temperatures and flow conditions within the river and so on. We have had what we refer to as a run of elvers during the second half of April. We're now in a phase at this stage between moon phases, which affect tides and so on, which have an impact on the recruitment of elvers. But we anticipate a second run probably within another week or so. So it's really too early for us to say what's likely to happen in the NABAN system. What we do know at this point is that already, this first week in May, we have exceeded the total of our recruitment in 2013. So the signs are there. We can only hope that we will see a significant increase. It's not going to be massive at this stage, but anything is very welcome. But to answer specifically the question you've raised, I indicated in my presentation to you about the duration of the various life cycles of the eel, and the fact that the entire life cycle could be 25 years or more. So what that suggests to me certainly is that we can't make decisions based on 1 year's figures, 1 year's data. We would like to see probably 4 or 5 or more years of improved elver recruitment before we could pin our hopes and say that we've turned a corner here. At which point then we could possibly be in a position where we would have to have a look at the harvest of brown eels and the number of people involved in it. Okay. But the point is we've had these slight increases in elver recruitment occasionally during the last 25 years. Unfortunately, it didn't amount to anything in the long run. So what I'm saying is we need to have 4 or 5 or more years in succession before we could pin our hopes on anything.
Okay, and you'll see we've tabled an article which was on the news this morning with regards to hundreds of thousands of eels which have died in a trap. Will that have an impact on you and the work that you're going to be doing?
It will not have any direct impact on our work. It's unfortunate that this has happened. Obviously, I was aware previously that there had been a problem over the Easter period. It's not for me to comment on what happened, but in direct answer to your question, whilst it's regrettable, it will not have any direct impact on the NABAN system.
Thank you. Mr. Hashing?
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, gentlemen, for your presentation there. Just the scientific figures that that's basically we were listening to there and been reading about in terms of numbers-wise. We're looking obviously at significant peaks and troughs there, and even in recent years, and I know you're taking a longer-term view to look at that, but that's quite significant there. Back to 2011, where you have 60,000 recruited, and was it 1.3 or?
Yeah, 60,000 and
1.3 million then purchased then.
Yes.
And likewise last year then from it was 6 million almost purchased then. And
yes. That actually is a reflection of, well, that 60,000 was the absolute low. We hope never to repeat that. But the quantity of fish bought in is a reflection of the price. One of the big issues that we faced during the 1990s and the early 2000s was the cost of the fish. Because they were in such short supply throughout Europe, and demand from fish farms on the continent and indeed in the Far East pushed the prices to a point beyond which we could no longer afford them. I referred earlier to the fact that I had begun work in Toom Bridge in 1987. That was one of the very early years when we bought Elvers, and we were paying £25 a kilo for them at that stage. In the late 90s, early 2000s, those prices went to as much as £1,000 per kilo. Now, at that stage, we were out of the market. We just could not compete. We couldn't justify spending that amount of money on which is basically a very, very long-term investment. So that would be reflected in the figures of purchase stock during those later years.
Yeah. Just the differential, Chair, just between sustainability, that I suppose is the one that actually maybe concerns a lot of us. And I met some of the eelmen on the Erne over Easter there, and many of them would insist that their figures would still justify that fishery being opened, or at least in some sort of limited capacity. Although they probably have recognised that maybe it might never happen again. Although the figures this year might prove something different. See, in terms of sustainability, you said there will be only a moderate increase this year.
Well, I mean, it's too early to say, to be absolutely frank about it. We're optimistic. This year, obviously, as I said earlier, we were in a position to buy some more fish, so that augurs well for the future. But I can only go back and stress the duration of the life cycle and the amount of time it will be before those fish are coming through the system.
Yeah. Now, in fairness, the committee might have a better understanding after our visit last July, I have to say. The ones that you are buying currently, they're coming off the Severn system, is that just solely?
Solely UK sourced, the River Wye, the River Parrot, and the Severn itself.
Right. Okay, thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Mr. McMullen?
Yes, Chair, thank you for your presentation. The last presentation we got about deals, the Chair was sort of hitting on it there, delved into nearly personalities and stuff like that there. Has there been any contact since that meeting we had with the last presentation today? Has there been any written requests for meetings or anything?
There have been no requests for meetings in relation to the general issues. There has been written contact from some of the people involved in the last presentation by way of application for the current season, the 2014 season, and in recent days there has been further correspondence from a few of them in relation to the appeal procedure with regard to the non-issue of the licences there.
I thought I knew a wee bit about eel fishing, and I heard that. I was pretty shocked with some of the allegations that were made. But on your long-term strategy, how do you find that this long-term strategy that you're working on at the minute? How do you see that as being the benefit of Lough Neagh?
Well, I mean, obviously I've explained in some detail the investments that we've made, both in restocking and establishing new processes and new initiatives and so on. It's a fundamental part of the ethos of the cooperative that we, if you like, leave this industry. This generation leaves it in as good a condition as we got it, if not better, for the next generation. That's built into the ethos of the society. So that has to be the long-term aim. Sorry, could you just remind me of the second part of your question?
The long-term strategy of Lough Neagh for the eel fishing, you're embarking on that there, you're talking to DCAL, you're talking to different people on that there. Is that a vital component of the future for eel fishing in Lough Neagh?
Absolutely, I believe so. There's much more interest from Europe, there's much more interest from local government. I've tried to emphasise that we have an important role to play in all of that. So, yes, going forward, I would see that as a major element of it. The pity would be if we were not successful in that regard, and that the very unique skills and traditions of the Lough Neagh fisherman would be lost, such as potentially could happen on the Erne, for example. No fishing being allowed there currently, although the hope obviously is that on the back of decent recruitment levels, the day will arrive when those guys can be allowed to fish again, before their skills and their experiences are lost forever.
Okay. Thanks, Chair. Thanks for your presentation.
Mr. Humphrey?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thanks for your presentation. Mr. Close, you said during your presentation that the Society will vigorously defend the financial support available to it.
Yes.
What do you mean by that?
Well, that comment arises from comments which were made before this committee back in November, which questioned our legitimate claim to any funding that's available. The inference was that we were somehow doing things unfairly, which perhaps ought to disqualify us in some shape or form. But that is absolutely not the case.
Okay. In relation to, you'll be aware that we've, as the Chair has alluded to, we've had presentations from others who have a different view from yourself and Mr. Conlon around the fishery in Lough Neagh. How do you address the assertion that they might make that it's a closed shop?
Well, I'm not entirely sure what they mean by that. We have explained to representatives of the group that you're speaking about in the past that yes, there's a history of and a tradition where the licences for allowing fishing for eels on Lough Neagh has essentially passed from one generation to the next, quite often within the same families. But that goes back to the foundations of the cooperative. This was a community-based initiative. It had that ethos, if you like, and the reward for those who became involved in those early stages was that there would be some sort of continuity. These people would have had their fathers, their forefathers would have had generations of experience with eel fishing in Lough Neagh, and I suppose there was a commitment to those people that should be allowed to continue. In terms of it being a closed shop, the acquisition of boat helpers licences is open. The facts are there are people who would not be satisfied if they show a boat helper's licence. They seem to be determined that only a boat owner's licence will satisfy their needs. The boat owners on Lough Neagh are self-employed. They are at liberty to take on whosoever they wish as a helper, provided that person has been nominated to the society and it has been agreed by them. So, no, I refute the allegation that it's a closed shop. I think there are ample opportunities out there for people to become engaged in the industry, should they so wish to avail of those.
So you believe that those who wish to be involved and become engaged in the industry, as you call it, it's open and transparent and it's fair and it's equitable?
I believe so.
How many boats actually are permitted to fish the loch?
That is a variable figure. As of now, in 2014, there are a couple of outstanding issues. We're still only a week into the new season, so there's still a couple of outstanding issues to be resolved. But from recollection, I think 110 boat owners' licences have been issued to date.
110 issued to date, but how many, what is your optimum, what is your ceiling in terms of licences?
Well, for the past number of years, our approach to that is that the number of licences issued in this year should not exceed the number issued in the previous year, and that's the way we have operated for the past 4 or 5 years now. So there's not a definitive figure as such, other than it relates to the previous year.
So you're saying, if I'm right, and I've picked it up correctly, you could have the same number of licences this year as last?
Yes, but not anymore.
Then how do you,
not over and above that.
Then how do you become engaged, as you put it, in the industry if the figure's the same year on?
Sorry, I don't understand the question.
You just said in the answer to my previous question that it's open and fair and transparent. People can become engaged in the industry. And then in the answer to my most recent question, you said, if I picked you up correctly, that the number of licences issued is not increased.
Yes, the number of
from the previous year.
The number of licences will be the same, but particularly in relation to boat helpers, the personnel will.
Yeah, but it's licenses. The question with respect was about licensing.
Yes.
You said to date you have 110. You have no ceiling as such, but it will not exceed what the figure was last year. That's if I picked you up correctly.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you weren't in last year, you'll not be in this year.
Yes, effectively.
You see, there may be some people out there who are looking to get a licence who will say it's impossible then to get in and become a fisherman with a boat on Lough Neagh.
I mean, I can only suggest that, that those people look at the criteria that are set and which are publicised and are open and transparent and all the rest. But there are ways and means of becoming eligible for a boat owner's licence should the point in time arrive when the society agrees and feels that it can actually do that.
Now, if I've listened to you correctly, it wouldn't really matter because they're not going to get one because you're not going to increase the figure.
Well, that may well change. None of us know the answer to that question.
Well, we'll see, I suppose, as time out. So can I ask then, in terms of you have 110 licences or permits to fish from boats this year to date?
But those are boat owners' licences,
yeah.
And each of those will have at least one helper, so there are a number of...
Well, okay, can I ask, when you say to date, can I ask you then, for the year that concluded,
yes.
How many did you issue?
I believe the figure was 112.
Right.
Okay, 112 or 113.
Right. So we're talking about 2 or 3
two or three
permits.
outstanding issues, which will probably be resolved in the coming days.
Mm-hmm. So, can I ask then, of the 110 or 12 or 13 or whatever it is that will be issued, how many of those are actually utilised and the boats are actually on the loch fishing?
Well, if we take last year, for example, 106 of those boats actually produced eels at some point in the season.
Right.
Now, within that number of boats, there will be those who fish very intensively, fill their quota on a daily basis for weeks on end. There will also be a number, if you like, at the other end of the scale, which will only fish very irregularly, and as a result of that, don't fish a lot of eels during the season. But the direct answer to your question is that there were 106 of those boat owners actually produced eels in last year, and that figure can vary from year to year as well. Given that number of people involved, it's inevitable that there may be problems, personal problems, health problems, all the rest. And each year there will be a handful of boats which don't produce anything. But that's to be expected.
So what then happens, I accept absolutely someone can take ill and they're self-employed, and if they're long protracted serious illness they'll not be able to fish. What then happens to the 6 or 7 who produce no eels to you? What happens to them when you're reviewing their licence or permit?
Well, if that situation were to continue for a number of years, and by that I mean 4 years, up to 4 years, at the end of that time, their licence would be considered lapsed, and it would not be eligible for reissue again.
Outside of illness, why would someone be allowed 4 years?
It's not.
They're not producing eels for you to produce. I mean, but if half of the permits that you put out didn't produce eels, you would be in a difficult position in terms of your production and food processing, wouldn't you?
Yeah, we certainly would have taken in fewer eels, that's for sure. But equally, I would like you to understand that, the fact that we have boats which produce few eels, boats which produce fill their quota basically every day, that's all taken into consideration, because that all comes together to produce the tonnage that we put through each season. So those factors are taken account of. The facts are that if all 110 boats were to produce their quota each day, the loch just simply couldn't sustain it. We wouldn't have the market for it, I admit that. It's just would be totally unsustainable and would be very, very foolish. So the fact that there's a variation in the production level across that range of boats is taken account of. Does that answer your question?
Not really, because I still don't know, outside of someone having serious health issues, which I absolutely sympathise with.
Yeah. Well, to answer that question, the 4-year limit is set there in the knowledge that we perhaps will not be made fully aware of the circumstances. It may be that health is cited as a possible reason for it, but ultimately we're not in the position where we can say, I don't believe you, or there's some other reason why you didn't fish. So we set the 4-year limit. We don't delve into people's personal circumstances, but the facility was there at the discretion of the society to allow those people who perhaps unfortunately did encounter some illness or some family difficulty, to allow them time to recover from that situation and get re-involved in the eel fishing. That particular requirement arises from a period of time in the mid-90s and the early 2000s when there was, if you like to put it, there were a number of people involved in fishing who turned to alternative employment. We're talking here in the days of the boom in the construction industry, for example. You didn't necessarily have to have any skills. If you did, all the better. But even labouring jobs were paying well in those days. Fishing is a hard life. It's long hours in dangerous conditions, unpleasant weather and all the rest. There was an obvious attraction, if there's more lucrative employment out there, to take it. And what we found during that period of time was that a number of fishermen, particularly some of the younger fishermen, moved in that direction. And then, unfortunately, we went from boom to bust in some ways in the construction industry. After a number of years, a number of very successful years. And the trend then was perhaps to look back into the eel fishing industry. But in the meantime, that industry has undergone severe changes, which impact on the capacity and the volume available to us from the loch. So it just was no longer possible at that stage to accommodate all of those who wanted to be involved in the eel fishing industry.
And the boom lasted longer than 4 years, so they would have lost their permit.
In some cases, yes.
In terms of the point that, finally, in terms of the point that Chair asked in relation to, after our visit to yourselves in July and then the presentation we had, which, may have been critical of your organisation, and the Chair made, I think, a very good suggestion about, meetings taking place to resolve issues or improve relationships or whatever. I think you indicated that there were difficulties with that. You had some one-to-one meetings with some people, and you had difficulties with others and so on. Can I just endorse what the Chair has said? I think it's better for everyone connected, both to the fishery and those outside its membership or permit holders, whatever, that should happen, because this is a very important industry to Northern Ireland. It's a very important industry to the Lough Neagh River Bann area, and I really do think that if people can get round the table and these differences ironed out, it's for everyone's benefit. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Irvine.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Do yourselves as a cooperative recognise Lough Neagh Fishermen's Association as a body?
We do not.
Do not recognise it? Okay. Am I right in saying that members of the association, Lough Neagh Fishermen's Association, are also shareholders?
I believe so.
Okay. Then I presume you have an annual general meeting?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I think you said there's been no recent face-to-face meetings with the organisation, with LNFA, is that right? There's been no face-to-face meetings of such?
We have never met with the association as a body, no.
Okay. Would it be right to say normal practice? I would have thought if the shareholders wanted meetings, that there would be normal practice that they would have meetings with.
Of course, there would be no issue there. You've alluded to the opportunities that an AGM would present, for example. Those were all open to all shareholders.
Yeah, one would have thought that. As I see it, they feel that they meet all the criteria for a licence, but still it's refused to them. And what do you say in regard to that they do meet all the criteria?
Well, I mean, you clearly haven't indicated a specific applicant, so all the circumstances would be different. But I do know from my involvement in the process that, for example, one of the very basic criteria that the society has used for a number of years is the record of helpers' licences held. And that's just a very basic one. It requires 7 consecutive years in the previous 10. I do know that a number of the people to whom you refer may have done at one stage, but certainly no longer meet that very basic fundamental criteria.
Shareholders then have no advantage when it comes to applying for licences?
Absolutely not.
Okay. Okay.
Just further to that question, can I just ask why you don't recognise the association?
We believe that they're not representative of the body, of the greater majority of the fishing community. We believe that they do not have a significant mandate.
And that's judged by the society, or is that judged by the executive within the society?
That's judged by the management team of the society, yes.
Okay, thank
Chair,
you.
can I just say, Mr. Close, I am shocked to hear that the society doesn't recognise. I mean, we both, Chair and I, made suggestions that your organisation should meet with people to try and resolve differences or address issues. It seemed to me that, and I'm coming back, Chair, and I thank you for your indulgence, because obviously the statement you made was subsequent to my questioning. I'm not sure how you can address issues face-to-face or in other meetings with an organisation your society refuses to recognise. It seems to me that there's an unwillingness there's clearly an unwillingness to engage with an organisation you're not even prepared to recognise. And I have to say, if you look in other industries, you look at the teaching professions, there are a number of unions that represent teachers, but they're all recognised, they're all discussed with, and it really doesn't matter whether they represent 10 fishermen or 60. I think your organisation would be better placed to meet them, discuss it.
Well, I think, Mr. Humphrey, your summation suggested that we haven't engaged with these people. What I did say was we haven't met face-to-face with them as a body. But certainly I've engaged with individuals who are part of this group on many, many occasions and in public forums.
Yeah, but Mr. Close, I heard you say your organisation does not recognise the association, which would suggest to me that you have not met the association that is, I presume, democratically elected and has its own officer team.
That is correct. That is correct. But we have met with individuals who claim to be members of the association or have made it known to us in correspondence that they are members of the association.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Hoshin, you wanted to again?
Yes, Chair, sorry, I'll have to go just afterwards. Just perhaps maybe for clarity, could we have a breakdown, maybe have many members of the association or members of the co-op, and that percentage-wise in terms of people who are supplying fish into the co-op, perhaps down the line?
Unfortunately, I can't answer the question in relation to the association because I do not know what their membership is.
What implications, this has been fairly public spat, across the board, what implications have there been, and maybe Mr. Conway can tell me, for fisheries management and enforcement?
Sorry, could you...
What implications, if any, have there been in terms of fisheries enforcement and management on the law?
Implications arising from
the difference of, obviously, a very public difference of opinion here between those.
Well, I'm not aware that there's been any great issue or any great change in
there has been stuff in the press,
specifically about
about the very public differences. And there's obviously a public interest issue there as well.
The public interest issue has been established over the last few years, yes. I'm not aware that the issues which you refer to has been raised in the press have arisen from members of the association as such. I can't categorically say that. But what I can say is that our enforcement officers, including Frankie here, have a job to do, and they continue to do that, and will continue to do that. I should say that some of the people who have made applications unsuccessfully for the grant of eel fishing licences are indeed active fishermen in relation to the scale fishery on Lough Neagh, which incidentally the cooperative also owns the rights to.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Okay, just further to that question, you said that that you were unsure who the membership of the association actually was, and if that's the case, then how do you not know that whether or not it's representative or not of fishermen?
I do know that some of the applicants for the licences have declared themselves as members of the association. The extent of the membership beyond that, I have honestly no idea about it.
Okay, thank you. Ms McCorley?
Thanks for the presentation. Whenever the association presented to the committee, they presented, and there was allegations about threats in it. Now, that strikes me as a serious allegation to make, and the implication is, or the insinuation is, that those threats came from yourself, which resulted, or yourselves rather, and that resulted in people having to cease employment. Could you respond to that, please?
Well, I will respond to that. Quite simply, that's an unsubstantiated allegation, and one which I took grave exception to, because it was pointing the finger at officers of the society who were not guilty of that. And there's really little more I can say about that. That's an issue that was raised on the occasion of the presentation to this committee back in November in a very, very public forum, which I consider to be totally out of order.
No, I mean, I actually just raised that to give you a chance to respond to it, because, I mean, it's a very serious allegation, and I think it's fair that you should have the opportunity to respond to it.
Other than to say it's an completely unfounded allegation, unsubstantiated, and I prefer to leave it at that.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Mr. McMullen?
Yeah, just quickly, the association we're referring to, is it constituted?
I have no idea.
Right. And at the last presentation, there was allegations, and again, that's to ask your opinion, that the police were involved in certain illegal activities by some of the members, and as far as social services went. Are you aware of that? These allegations were made by the spokesperson of the group who was up here the last time.
I'm aware that that allegation has been made. I'm not aware of any police involvement in investigations. However, I am aware that some individual fishermen are potentially under investigation, and I know that on the back of being asked to provide certain information about their earnings. But that is the extent of my knowledge on it, and I'm well aware that that sort of investigation is not peculiar to fishermen or Lough Neagh fishermen. That's happening right across the province at the minute if you lift the paper any day of the week.
No, it's just that ranked very highly in the main spokesperson's presentation here. Personally, I find it was out of context of what it was all about. But no, how do we find out if the association is constituted? Because if it's not constituted, then does it have a voice? But if it is constituted, it does have a voice.
Well, you may wish to begin by asking them themselves. They, as far as I'm aware, claim to be a registered trade union, so it's not an area that I'm particularly familiar with. I do know that our own registration of the society is through the Industrial and Providence Society, which is under the responsibility of the Department of Enterprise, Trade and Industry, if I've got that right. Our subsidiary company, Two Meal Fishery, is registered in Companies House, but with regard to the association, I suspect you would have to go to some of the trade union registration offices to find that out.
Maybe that's something, Chair, that ranked heavily here today that we as a committee can now ask: is the association constituted?
We can seek that information from the association.
We could, because I think it would be.
Is that you?
Thank you.
Have you concluded, Mr. Humphrey?
Yeah. Mr. Close, can I ask, does your body receive money from the state? Some grant aid?
From local government?
Yeah, well, from local government or regional government?
Yes. Currently, we are benefiting from a funding programme which emanates from the European Fisheries Fund for restocking purposes, and the funding available from there is matched at a local level with money which we receive from DCAL, but I understand that DARD, the Department of Agriculture, have some involvement in it as well. So yes, the answer to your question is yes.
Okay. And you get nothing from local councils?
We get nothing from local councils.
I mean, I just think, and restating a point that I made earlier, but I do think, given that public money is given from 2 government departments, some of it European money, clearly, I think there's a duty and responsibility on your society to meet with the association, no matter how it's constituted or if it's constituted, to address these issues and have them ironed out, because public rancour is not something which is good for the industry and good for your society. And I think the sooner these things are addressed to everyone's satisfaction, if that's possible, the better. And I would implore your society to do that. Thanks, Chair.
Can I just say, would that not be the role of the funding bodies to go down that road? If they think there's something in breach of the funds.
I think that what Mr Humphrey, not that I'm going to speak for Mr Humphrey, but is indicating really for local relations, it might be good for conversations to be had, given the fact that we've had 4 judicial reviews, a vast amount of public money has been spent in relation to that as well. That moving forward, that opening up of that and our willingness to talk should really maybe come from the society and towards the association.
Madam Chair, if I could possibly just comment on that. I mean, what you've asked sounds perfectly reasonable, unless you consider it in the context of the presentation that was made to you in November by those same people.
And I appreciate that too. But I think we're going to go around in circles with this one. But can I thank you for the time this morning, and again, obviously for your hospitality whenever we visited in July. It was a worthwhile visit for the committee to do that. So.
You were very welcome, and I would repeat the invitation. If at any time in the future you feel you would like to visit us again, you'd be most welcome. And again, thank you for your for facilitating us today to make this presentation.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Thank you. No. See you later. Okay. Just with reference to that, we see there was a request made that the committee contact the association. There are members of the association in the gallery today, so they'll expect our correspondence. So, do members have any other proposals with regard to the presentation which we received? Okay, thank you. Moving then to matters arising in correspondence trackers at page 67. I'm just content to note that correspondence, which is outstanding. Refer you then to a copy of Hansard of the DAR briefing at the Agriculture Committee meeting on the 29th of April. And this was with regard to the Fisheries Bill, and I'd reflected on that at the last meeting. If members are content that we write to the Department just to ascertain whether DCAL do intend to have input to the bill and to the extent of that and the likely substance of what's perhaps going to be proposed. Members are content that we do that also. Refer you then to correspondence at page 82, which is from the Committee for Education regarding funding for Irish medium education early years. This is just, we've been copied into this. This has gone to the Minister already from the Education Committee, so if you're content that we note that. Page 85 is correspondence from DCAL regarding upcoming consultations. This was with regard to proposals for the Ulster Scots Academy and also Irish Language Academy, but to date we haven't received any information with regards to a timeline for that. So again, if members are content that we note that. There's a tabled letter from the Assembly Business Office regarding annual reports for 2012 from Inland Waterways. The report is held in the committee office, and if any member wishes to have a look at that, they're welcome to do that. And again, if you're happy enough that we note. There's also the Invest NI Brussels Bulletin for April 2014, which has also been tabled, and the report includes information on Horizon 2020 seminar, which is scheduled for the 27th of May in Belfast. And I think we're hoping that Dr Hull may attend that on our behalf, so again, if members are content to note. In your pack, you'll also see the raised research paper on the Theatres Act 1968, and if members would wish to note that and maybe refer to that as information just as we move through our business. Chair's business, the invitation tracker is at page 94, and it provides upcoming invitation dates for various events are tabled there. You do actually have an invitation from from the committee office to attend a meeting with the Honourable the Irish Society, which a number of members met when we were in London, so we were really just extending an invitation to them to come back, and if they happen to be in Belfast, that we would meet with them. So that's going to take place on the Wednesday, the 11th of June, just in advance of our trip to the Northwest. So if members are content and would indicate their attendance, that would be useful, and let the committee office know. That's at 1:15 on Wednesday, the 11th. The members have to be away by 3:30, so. And I think we're going to include a tour in that for them. So, but the conversation will be useful.
Lunch on a tour as well, with discussion over lunch.
Okay. Refer you then to a tabled invitation from the Education Committee to the World in Your Classroom event, and that's been scheduled for the 27th of May. And again, if you plan to attend, if you let the team know. Forward work programme is at page 99. Peter will
very quickly
look at that with us.
Swords, as members are aware, has had to be postponed until October. There were some issues with staffing at Swords, so we're rescheduling that for Thursday, the 2nd of October, and that's also with the Environment Committee. I just want to highlight the dinner in Limavady on Wednesday, the 11th of June as well, with Northwest 200, Flarfield Arts Centre and Milk Cup representatives. That's the day prior to the meeting and stakeholder event for the Equerry. At Flarfield Arts Centre, that's been organised for Limavady, and members are aware. And so we're just finalising numbers on that, if members let us know if they're able to go. And the next the meeting, not next week but the week after, is also a Tuesday, and in room 30 next door. I'll send out further confirmation of that.
Okay, just before we moved into a closed session, or do members have any other businesses which they want to notify? No? Okay, thank you.